Good day. My name is Marion. I'm a business strategy consultant at Art Infographic, and today is basically the last presentation of my talk on breaking the small business mindset. And as you have gone through the lectures over the last few days, I'm sure that there are a lot of frameworks and strategies that you now can apply to your business and improve how you run your small business. And today's talk is probably much shorter than the lectures that we've had over the last couple of days, because we're really coming to the end of our slide deck. But we are talking about probably one of the least talked about and a thing that can really affect your business quite severely if you don't take it into account. And especially since we're talking about Japan and Japanese frameworks and that they are known for their innovation and adapting to market changes and that kind of thing. I think that it's really relevant to this talk. So we're going to talk about the ability to pivot and to change your strategies and understand emerging market trends and that kind of thing. These kind of terms kind of get thrown around, you know, by the internet gurus. It's like, oh, you need to be a trend spotter. But then when you start asking, how do I understand trends? How do I find out what trend to look for? Then they might throw out, oh, you must look at Google Trends, which really doesn't really tell you much. It tells you what is, well, when I say tell you much, it doesn't tell you much about the future trends and what's going down there. It's really kind of newsy stuff, you know, based on sport, pop culture, music. Nothing that's really, unless you're in those industries, going to really affect you. So where do you look and how do you do these things? And is it actually important as a small business to care about these things? Like, do you really care about the global political environment or what's happening, you know, with the FTSE or the NASDAQ? Like, does that actually affect you? Like, is it really important? So that's what I'm now going to talk about, is to explain from my experience why I think it's important and where you should look and how you should make decisions based on what's happening and what's trending and what's happening in the market. So I'm going to start off with a global market and just explain like why I strongly advise that you look at the global market basically on a daily basis. So let's start off there, is that in 2008 we had the global financial crisis, and that sort of started happening just before 2008. Things started looking a bit strange in the property market. And the reason why I knew that was I had been following it. I find international news very interesting, and I've always tried to stay up to speed of what was happening globally. If you take me to a coffee shop and there's newspapers around, I'll take a newspaper, I'll go through it. And really, newspapers are a very good place to start. And there's a reason why very successful business owners tend to have a newspaper delivered to them if they can, and they go through it on a regular basis, because it's from going through these newspapers that they can detect trends and market changes quite quickly. It's not that they're necessarily reading the actual content, the actual story, but they're taking bits and pieces out of the story and using it to kind of put the puzzle together and realize, okay, this is heading in a negative direction, or this is heading in a positive direction, and the chances or the probabilities of that affecting my industry, my country, or my work that I'm doing here. This is what the probability is like, and I've become very good at that. That is really a big passion of mine, strangely enough, but it really is. And I would say that it's a really good idea to not just look at the newspapers, but also, and when it comes to reading the newspapers, it's a really good idea to look at the quality. So, you know, in South Africa, we've got, well, I think any country, you've got like your main newspapers, and then we've got kind of sideline ones that are more appealing or in languages of smaller communities. And what I can say is that the smaller the community that it appeals to, the more local the news becomes, and the more biased it tends to become, because the journalists are there kind of telling the stories from their viewpoints. They don't have as many checks and balances in place where the news needs to be, and I have to be careful of saying this, because even the main newspapers, there'll be columns written by journalists that are opinion pieces, you know. So it's not that a main newspaper is totally factual, and it's really difficult. There's always two sides of the story, and some newspapers are more leaning towards, and I hate these terms, but leaning towards the right or the left, or are more liberal, or whatever's the story, and they'll tell the same story as another newspaper with a slightly different slant to it, because that's how they market themselves. That's how they've segmented themselves. So what I can say is that the smaller the newspaper, and the smaller the, you know, newsletters or magazines or whatever, the more opinionated and biased they seem to be, and more local and based on people and people's feelings, and that kind of thing, and you know, stories about the water pipe bursting down the road, or some pollution in the park, you know, in the neighborhood, that kind of stuff, that really, unless you are in the recycling industry, it really doesn't really affect you. You know, it's I'm talking about global news and how that can affect you, and it really does. It really does, and that's, I'm going to explain that now. So further to newspapers, so try to get, preferably on a weekly basis. Anything more than weekly, you land up with a room full of newspapers. So it gets a bit much. But I would say weekly or even fortnightly, to get a good copy of one of the top newspapers with the biggest readership, and then going through it. But when you go through it, try skimming through it, and try finding golden threads of what seems to be happening. Are there multiple conversations around particular products, you know, or issues, global issues that's happening in the world? And you'll often find that if you skim through a newspaper, you'll often find, like, wait a second, if I actually kind of look at these headings, about 60% of them are talking about the green economy, or 60% of them are talking about inflation rates in America, or whatever. And you can kind of pick up trends like that. So newspapers are a great place to start. Another place is the Right magazines. Now, you need to be careful with this, because when it comes to magazines that have to do with the economy, again, they tend to be filled with opinion pieces. And if you find magazines that are related to a segment of the economy, so for instance, maybe you'll read a magazine about farming and the farming industry, and it tends to not really give that much information. You might find some bits and pieces, and it's kind of difficult to explain because, like, there's a book called The Farmer's Almanac that comes out in America, and right now they're talking about how farmland is kind of moving out of the hands of the older generation, and these big corporations are wanting to buy this farmland up. There's about $27 trillion worth of farmland that has now recently become available for sale. So, there are these important sort of bits and pieces that come out of those magazines, and to be honest with you, looking at farmland information is also pretty important, because that explains things that are happening with resources, and resources affect economies. So that is something to kind of look at. But I'm talking about like magazines about trading or about cryptocurrency or things like that. They can be quite industry specific and opinion pieces on leaders. They thought leadership articles. And it's very much like, going to LinkedIn and reading some of the stuff that thought leaders put together over there. And you might get some golden nuggets of what's happening globally, but it's still quite a narrow focus. So you need to be careful of which magazines and newspapers that you actually read. So I like to read like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Economist, those kind of things. I prefer to read news than actually watch the news, especially very, very extreme left or right. Like I just find that a lot of like CNN or Sky News or Fox News or whatever, a lot of their reporting is based on trying to get people hyped up and on the side of their team. It's a lot of cheerleading that goes on there, that, it's like, we are better than the blue team, we are better than the red team, rah, rah, rah. And so I would say try and steer away from those. But at the same time, I would kind of dot my news with that as well during the day. But don't find yourself just watching CNN or just watching Fox or just watching BBC or just watching The Guardian. Like try and, if you find a particular story interesting, try and watch the same sort of length videos, but from alternative news sources, and kind of see if you can kind of find your own middle road out of the information that you're getting. So yeah, I'm not political. I'm not a political person. I feel that's I find it like a sports team, and kind of cheering for a sports team. At the end of the day, I just want the best for each country. It's, this whole thing about putting leaders on a pedestal, and I don't know, for me it's about the policies, about how you run the country. And I would rather actually, instead of having leaders making the decisions, be in a situation where those kind of decisions are more in the hands of the people and give people more power. So I'm not really political, so don't ask me which newspapers are right or left or whatever. I really don't care. I look at the facts and the information and kind of weigh it up, and then, you know, put my hypothesis together and my way of thinking. And I also don't become fixed on an idea. I'm quite open to hearing other people's ideas and opinions, and then being able to weigh it up with mine. As long as those people aren't forceful and telling me that my ideas are wrong, I'm open to listening to their ideas, because very often I've found that there's an alternative to my way of thinking, and I'm very often wrong, and I'm ready to learn. And you know, that's what conversation's about, right? But so the newspapers, very good. Magazines, be careful, choose them properly. And what I would say is that when you're looking at innovation, a really good magazine, crazy enough to read, is the Popular Mechanic. Now that is more about like industry and, you know, AI and manufacturing and those kind of things. And generally people would assume that that's more of a male readership. But even as a female entrepreneur going through that, it's generally pretty spot on the future of like AI or industry, or, you know, the tools that affect your business. And you can kind of get an idea of things that are happening as far as the market changing. So now, why would you as a small business want to look at like international global affairs, and why is that important to you as a small business? Like, why should you care? Like right now, all you care about is bottling pickles and selling them at the market on a Saturday morning, for instance. So let me tell you an anecdotal thing from my side is that I was a photographer. Just before 2008, I'd started up my photography studio. My husband and I had a number of businesses. All those businesses were doing very well. And I actually had a young child, and he said to me, I can kind of stay at home and do my own thing because our businesses were doing well enough. And I wanted to do something for myself, and I landed up with another business that eventually branched into doing photography. And because our businesses were doing so well, and my husband was quite a spender, I bought 2 properties. So I was focused more on investment and that kind of thing. And he was spending left, right, and center. And he bought boats and quad bikes, and he moved his business from one property to the next and paying deposits each time. And he was just spending money all over the show. We had quite a few cars, and quite a lot of luxury items. And then, as I said, we had a couple of properties. And then 2008 hit. But because since I was a teenager, I've always found like global issues interesting, and I've always followed the news, and I've always kept tabs on what was happening, in particular in America, because what happens in America seems to have a knock-on effect, and it affects South Africa in about 1.5 to 2 years' time. We get that knock-on effect. So as an example, now in 2024, America's sitting with huge homelessness issues, there's inflation issues, there's huge taxes in areas like California. Hollywood is basically closed down. And I was reading an article this morning about how the government is now really affecting the real estate market. And I've been looking at the real estate market in New York City as an example, and like the high crime rates that they experiencing in certain pockets of the country. There's those kind of things that are going on. And I'm just keeping tabs on all of that because I know that a lot of those trends kind of affect South Africa down the line. Not saying that we're going to have exactly the same things happening, but it's going to have an impact in one way or another in South Africa. And the whole way of monitoring trends is to try and understand as the story unfolds how it is impacting my country. So because I have been watching the trends, and for me, my preferred investment vehicle is property. I've always found real estate very interesting. I saw that there was things happening in the real estate market in the sort of late 2007. You know, before the whole crisis happened, I kind of saw stuff was, wait a second, this is, I don't, you know, they were changing the contracts on the bonds. And it's also because I was buying properties at the same time in South Africa. And, you know, there was this, you know, whether you actually link your interest rate to the prime rates and all of that kind of stuff. And I was like, what's going on here? There's something strange happening in the property market in America. And I told my husband, I said, you know, there's something going on here. And because of that, we started advertising for tenants on one of our properties. You know, and we were looking to actually sell that property. Although we had kind of just bought it, we didn't want to sit with a problem because we saw that there was stuff going down in America. So we put it on the market to sell it. We weren't able to sell it, but we were able to get tenants into the property at the right price and at the right time. And then we also started selling off our luxury items, the boats, the quad bikes. We moved my husband's business onto our property, built huts and that, and moved the whole business and all our staff over there. So then we cut down on paying rent for our business because it was on our property. And we started making these changes. We did some fixing up of our property so that we could get an evaluator in who could then advise us and value the property at a higher rate, and we could get a larger access bond on our business, on our property. So we could kind of make these really big decisions prior to when things really got bad in South Africa, and the interest rates just went through the roof. We had put these things in place to kind of mediate what was coming, and we knew what was coming based on what was happening in America. And we actually had debts that we owed my husband's family, and we started buying up gold and gave it to our husband's family instead of actually paying off the debt, because they said they didn't want us to pay off the debt. They didn't care when we paid it off. But we just felt that, you know, it's better that we do that. So we bought gold, and because the price of gold, you know, when you watch these trends, you realize, okay, so the price of gold is pretty good right now, and we've got some money coming in. Let's buy it now at this price. And we were able to buy quite a bit of gold, and we gave it back to our family as our way of paying back the debt, a loan that we had got from them. So not only did we pay off our loan, but then when the gold price went up, they were able to sell off the gold at a premium price, and they made money on that. So nobody lost. I mean, we got our loan, we paid off our loan, and they made money in the way that we had paid off our loan. So that all comes from following trends, following global trends, and and those were kind of decisions we made for our family. Now, how does that relate to small business, though? So at the time, as I said, I was doing photography, and I'd been doing it for a couple of years prior to the 2008 crisis, and I'd been selling packages, and it included a certain number of photos on a CD to the clients. And I saw this happening and coming our way, and I thought, with photography, it's quite interesting in that it's a luxury item. It's not a need, it's a want. It's like, if you weighing up between paying rent and food and going for a photo shoot, it doesn't fall in that same sort of category as clothing and shelter and food and that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, people want to have good quality memories and photos of their families, and I find that people are prepared to kind of scrape together money so that they could get a good quality photo shoot every once in a while. And this was before the time of smartphones really being adapted. Digital cameras had really only just come out. So when I saw this happening in America and heading our way, I decided to change my business model from selling packages, photography packages, to selling photos individually with a minimum order of photos, just to cover the cost of really my time of the photo shoot. It wasn't really to make any money, because I was running a really profitable business. And the reason why it did so well, it did well during the 2008 crisis, is because I could tailor my packages to people's budgets. So photo shoots were seen as a luxury item, and I was in the same target market of, I was appealing to the higher middle income and the higher income brackets. I did celebrity shoots. I did a lot of top executives. I did the whole of Deloitte and Touche. All their top execs that were clients of mine. So I was dealing with these high income people, and my whole branding and everything was around that. But I realized even the high income people, myself being one of them, was really taking financial strain, because we had all these luxury items and properties and things. And the whole 2008 crisis really affected the higher income bracket in a big way. And I can tell you, if you're earning a lot of money and then suddenly you have that carpet pulled out from under you and you're having to pay these huge interest rates, and it's quite a fall. It's quite a shock. And how do you manage that? And so the other photographers in my bracket were selling their photo shoots at high prices, and they didn't pivot. Some of them were offering some discounts and some promotional packages, but they became very quiet, and so many studios actually closed down, which is sad. But my studio was thriving. I had to employ people on. I eventually actually needed to franchise so that I could open up more studios, because I was doing 40 shoots a month. And that was just a lot. I was shooting over weekends. I was editing till 2 in the morning. And my studio was just so popular. And I made quite a lot of money. And then I started selling franchises, and I made a lot of money selling franchises. So that is why it's important to kind of look at what's happening in the global trends of things. And now with 2024 being what it is, and there's so much activity globally, there's so much that needs to be addressed, and that's going to affect so much stuff. I mean, it's just crazy. We're sitting with wars, and we're sitting with inflation, and we're sitting with recessions and elections, and these very powerful leaders, and there's and the environmental issues, and um, natural disasters, and there's like a lot going on. And all of those in one way or another can affect you, can affect your country, and can affect your small business. And you kind of need to just be very aware and open to it, not tied in to the actual storyline and to the personalities inside it. You need to be able to look at it and say, okay, there's a trend that's happening here. There's a lot of farmland that's being opening up to being bought, and there's corporates that are interested in buying that farmland. And okay, so there might be a trend that's going to be happening over there. Or, there's stuff that's happening in the UK at the moment, and that can affect something there. Like you would wonder, like, why is something that's happening in the UK with the immigration and the riots and everything that they've had in the UK, how does that affect South Africa? Well, I can say, as somebody who drives around in an Uber, like a lot of the drivers over here, when I talk to them and I ask them, like, is this like a side hustle? What do they do? A lot of them are actually saving up enough money to go to the UK to go and work in the healthcare industry as caregivers and as paramedics and so on, and to train in the healthcare in the UK. And then when you go and check the trends of like the NHS in the UK and the amount of immigrants that they're employing into the healthcare sector, and then you look at the riots and what's happening over there, where people are upset with the number of immigrants that are coming into the UK, it all kind of ties into each other. And how that affects you as a small business might not be completely clear, but you need to kind of know about those things, because at some point it will just be like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that event, I can see how that could affect the gold price. Or, oh, that event, I can see that can, affect housing prices, or whatever's the story. So you kind of need to take those, you kind of have to uncover your eyes. You kind of have to take your head out of the sand and look around and not get tied up in a story, not become like a politician and start becoming opinionated. That's the last thing that I'm asking. I don't want people that are opinionated. I'm saying look at multiple opinions and look at multiple facts and look for trends, look for golden threads, look for things that can impact you, and just be aware of what is going on around you. So that is something that small businesses don't do. They're like, why? Why is that important to me?